You're listening to the podcast about little-known niche subcultures and hobbies that reintroduces you to your neighbors in Technicolor. I'm Leslie Thompson, and it's niche to meet you. You're listening to Niche to Meet You. I'm Leslie, and this is part 2 of our story about wild turkey conservation. We originally released this 4-part miniseries last year, but it was before the Apple New and Noteworthy pick and before a lot of press that gave us some attention, and a lot of people have not heard our wild turkey miniseries. You've already met Farmer Billy, but you're about to meet Mary Weeockee, one of my favorite interview subjects in the entire history of this show. And please, I beg of you, stick around to the very end. This piece was written to be consumed in its entirety, which means there are extremely important conclusions and thoughts up until the last minute. So please enjoy part 2 of the Wild Turkey Conservation Miniseries 2025 Remix. At this point in telling a niche story, I like to pull the curtain back even more on the subject. I consider what we've learned about the people who do it, and what the niche feels like and looks like, and we talk to the ones who are at the origins of it. I think that doing this gives us a clearer picture of how something starts, what it started as, and how its evolution has progressed to where it currently stands. It's interesting to see how people bring their own experiences to something and add to the lore. For the last miniseries, we talked to 2 of the original writers of Warhammer 40,000, a sci-fi tabletop war game written from the tradition of Tolkien and the influence of Dungeons & Dragons. But for wild turkey conservation, we could go back to the mid-1900s when the NWTF formed, and I very well could have taken that approach, told that story. In fact, I fully intended to, but it was in a conversation with Ken Beach, the conservationist from Illinois, where the true origins of this niche began to emerge, and it is much further back than the 1900s.
I really believe the Native Americans are probably the greatest group of conservationists by far. They really worshiped the land and the animals, but they also had to harvest animals to survive. And so they have a really unique perspective.
Historian Brent Rogers talked about this too. His was one of the first interviews I ever conducted.
I think the wild turkey and the American buffalo are 2 of our most iconic species. It's part of our American fabric, and because of that, I think we owe it to those species to make sure that they're maintained. If you look at the Native Americans and you see how important turkeys and buffalo or bison were to their culture, even in terms of their spiritual side of things, there are many ways they were incorporated.
Yes, we have to go back to the very beginning, to the origins of this land that we and the wild turkeys call home, to the traditions of the earliest conservationists whose practices we borrow today. And the expert on this, I'm very happy to tell you, is also a turkey person, and her name is Mary Weeockee.
I talk a lot of turkey, believe me. Constantly talking turkey.
I was very excited to meet Mary, and Mary is always excited to talk turkeys. What brings you to talk so much about turkeys?
They're fascinating. They really are an interesting creature. His history, like you said, goes further back than probably science as we know it now is studying them. But I think as a cultural standard use, religious use, there's always been a relationship with humans and that particular bird. All kinds of turkey talking goes on throughout millennia.
Mary is a retired archaeologist in New Mexico, and she's a member of the Pueblo Nation. She frequently talks about the native peoples and their relationship to the turkey, which is indeed historic.
In one of my first dig sites, there are human remains, and what intrigued me was the shrouds. Everyone's wrapped in something. You know, like now, the Pueblo people, we use Pendleton blankets. And prior to that, there were fine linens or rabbit fur or turkey feather blankets, and that was your shroud. To see the very first one, you see a little infant wrapped in it, you're like, wow, okay, that baby was precious. And for them to adorn it the way they did, and to examine that shroud. I wanted to know, first of all, what that blanket was made from, and then to see that it was feathers was impressive. So it started this whole journey. No matter where I went in the Southwest, the turkey was the favored animal to create these beautiful blankets.
And this, the turkey blanket, this is what Mary's known for. After discovering these blankets woven with yucca and stuffed with turkey feathers, Mary's curiosity led her to make a blanket of her own.
I had the opportunity to go out with the Department of Game and Fish and with some biologists that were going to trap some birds, live birds that were invasive to a golf course. And there were Zuni there was Acoma, there were different groups of people who were going to be given these wild birds to release into their reservations. So they had a huge net set up, and here they come, about 38 of them, and they dropped this net. And there was an explosion of feathers. And I was the only crazy lady with a bucket running around trying to pick up all these loose feathers. And they were looking at me like, aren't you going to get a bird? And I was all like, I need these feathers,
As Mary followed the turkeys around with her bucket to collect their feathers, she got especially curious about something that ended up becoming the key to her understanding of the native people's use of the turkey feather.
The biologists captured the birds and they were all holding them in their arms. I would come behind the rangers and then I'd lift up the bird's tail and then I would pull these feathers out. And they just came out and the bird was relaxed. There was no blood, there was no nothing. So when a predator grabs him, that's how he escapes. In studying them, the bird will grow that feather in 3 days back. Even though you pulled that feather out, he's going to grow another one right away. And then I asked the ornithologist from Comanche Nation. He told me, yes, you're right. All birds bleed. If you were to force a feather out, they wait for the eagles to molt, and then they collect the feathers. So that way, they're not killed for ceremony. In the gathering of turkey, that wasn't it.
This experience set Mary on a path to learn more about the turkey's practical significance in addition to the foundational presence of the bird in her own culture, which she was already very familiar with. The turkey is an extremely important part of the native people's spiritual culture, especially in the Southwest of North America.
When they come from South America, from Peru, they're golden. They're beautiful. I've seen them bronze-looking birds. And anything gold, remember, was considered spiritual. So they were worshipped down there. And as they come up, they're traded even further north into the Pueblo systems. And now you see color change because they're eating different food. They're having to adapt to their environment, so they're changing color. They're in a darker forest. And he's still got that bronze and that turquoise green color. He's magnificent looking.
So yes, they're beautiful, but it's not just the beauty that makes the turkey an important part of this culture. There's a practical and poetic reason too.
We're always constantly praying for rain. Tribes all throughout America, the first thing we ask for is water. We need rain for our plants. So this turkey, when he thumps his wings, it becomes thunder. The dark feathers, they become rain clouds. So when you see some of these feathers on regalia or headdress, those represent like the dark, ominous rain clouds, cumulus nimbus. Again, his whistle, calling of the rain. Certain tribes believe that when he stomped his feet so hard, he created mountain ranges. His power was that immense.
As I'm writing this right now, there's a murmur of thunder outside my studio window. The sky is darkening. Maybe, if I listen closely enough, there might be a turkey call in the distance. We do need rain here in Nashville. My hydrangeas are thirsty. And this power the turkey has to bring the rain, well, that's something the indigenous peoples valued a great deal.
And again, in the Aztec world, to be considered as a god, how powerful was that bird to them to say that he was a god, that he could be worshipped. These kinds of things reign throughout all, I think, tribal people about this particular bird. We all have stories of who he is, and his feathers are used for prayer sticks or to ask for prayers. We know that the eagle, we consider him the messenger, but this creature that doesn't fly as high as the eagle but lives on the ground, his purpose, I think because he's more closer to the earth and us, he's powerful.
It's almost like an incarnation of deity because he's living among you.
Yes, and these feathers and everything that bird gives, it's amazing.
The turkey isn't just a mythical creature no one's seen that represents a phenomenon or acts as a savior. No, the turkey is a real embodiment of provision, and in practical ways, but not in the ways you'd think. After this break, we start with a surprising revelation that absolutely blew my mind and started me on a quest to understanding why the wild turkey was so important to begin with. We'll be right back. We at the Niche to Meet You podcast strive for high production value and creative integrity, and we spare little expense to bring it to you, even in the smallest of offerings, which is why we have produced the following advertisement you're about to hear in order to tell you about our merchandise. Enjoy. Merch! Merch is here! Niche to Meet You merch. Niche to Meet You merch. Niche to Meet You merch. The merch is here! Niche to Meet You merch. Niche to Meet You merch. Niche to Meet You merch. The merch is here! Merch is here. Find a link to merchandise in the show notes. The indigenous spiritual significance of the wild turkey began with its color, that golden color, which signified deity and made it worthy of worship. But if that's all it was, the turkey would never have risen to the level of esteem it did within the southwestern native cultures. It had practical uses, and one might assume that to mean eating. But that's actually not the case.
And they didn't really eat them. You're not seeing very much evidence until the drought. And there was a 35-year drought that hit Mesa Verde and all those villages up in the northern Rio Grande Basin. You would think, as you're digging a hearth, that you would see a lot of turkey, and you don't. Europeans who are used to eating pheasants and doves and game birds consider this wild turkey a game bird. And that's when it starts to become a food source. So, he wasn't eaten like we eat turkey today. He was a very valuable member of your tribe.
A wild turkey flock provides a lot of things to a large number of people. The feathers can be blankets, as we already know, but it can also be regalia and clothing. Turkeys eat insects, which make them an important part of the garden. And then once the bird passes, bones can be used for tools and needles and weaponry and music.
And then the wing bones become musical instruments because they're hollow and they can be made into a whistle or a flute. My grandfather used to have these bones drying on the windowsill, and one day I asked him, "Hey, why do you save these? Are we going to eat them?" And he just looked at me with that grandfather look. And he says, "Oh, no." And he put it to his mouth and he started making this call, like, and what that is, that's a female calling a male.
Remember Billy, who took me hunting in the last episode? He had one of these calls. At the end of our time together, after I stopped recording, he pulled it out to show me. And he called with it, in the middle of a field of cows. Here's the other thing about the wild turkey that endeared the native peoples to it. It's a companion, almost like a dog.
I had a friend that bought chickens, and there was this red turkey in there. And he says, I don't know what this is, such a weird looking chicken. And I looked and I said, that's a baby turkey. He says, well, should I take it back? I said, no, raise it, see what happens. And that bird rode on that horse with that old man. I'm talking way up in the mountains, and this turkey would jump on the back of that saddle. And sometimes he says, no, we're going too far, you got to stay home. And he would get mad.
That's incredible. When you tally up all the reasons for why the wild turkey was a practical part of this culture, the spiritual significance is easy to understand. And it's also no stretch at all to accept that the native peoples began the wild turkey conservation movement thousands of years before the modern-day conservationists. I feel like it's important to say here that Mary is speaking specifically about the southwestern indigenous peoples, whose specific subspecies of turkey came up from Mexico. Though there is evidence of the same relationship to the turkey in the southeast, where dig sites like at Boiling Springs in Nashville show evidence of domestication and use of bones and feathers in everyday life. And while native peoples are not a monolith, their individual tribe practices and views are just as diverse as any other cultures. There are some overarching principles in their relationship to the land that are entirely informative of the movement to save the wild turkey in the 1970s. The three principles are rest, respect, and reciprocity. The first one, rest, could maybe even be called restraint. And this was a principle the native peoples learned through their own relationship with the land.
We give the forests a rest. There's times where there's no hunting, no fishing, nothing, no gathering of plants or anything. And that's always been a traditional intent. It's always been something that's been done by not only by all Native Americans. There's that give everything a time of rest and let it revive itself. Because we've always tried not to over harvest, because that's something that we learned from the past. That's why we ended up moving from place to place, over harvesting over everything, using too much.
The second principle is respect of the land as a whole, knowing how the animals and plants exist together to maintain balance. And this is something Ken Beach has found in his conservation work.
The environment will always win. It may be hundreds of years, but it will self-correct over time through diseases, through things that will bring things more to balance, because it's always looking for that equilibrium balance. And so we just have to learn, and that's where I think, again, the Native Americans have a great concept with the thousands of years that they developed this, I think, of being able to be in balance with nature, and it allows you to continue to harvest and so forth, but you don't want to have big negative impacts on the other side of things. It's all that trying to work toward that balance.
Stephanie Colty is a member of the Tulalip Nation in the Northwest United States. She has a nonprofit to teach younger generations about Native culture and traditions, and to her, it all comes back to balance.
Balance and harmony. Balancing, like when I go harvest, they always say not to take more than what you need. So that way you can save more for other people and to save it for future generations to come. We would go out to harvest the fish, right? And the fishermen wouldn't grab the biggest fish. You would think that they would, right? Because that's kind of what we're programmed in Western society to be like, bigger is better. But they said that they don't grab the biggest ones, so that way they can make it to the spawning grounds. Their offspring will make it and continue. And we were okay with having medium-sized fish or even small fish. And I'm sure people or certain tribes probably even preferred it. You know what I mean?
Respect and balance also come into play when you consider the natural order of the environment. Here's Mary Wiyaki.
Even a mouse, a small mouse that's endangered, he had a beneficial purpose on that landscape. And as soon as he's gone, whatever was invasive or what we thought, it's going to come back and take over. But you got to learn to live side by side with these creatures. And I love that the conservation and wildlife, game and fish, all these entities look at these ways of finding that balance.
The Iroquois Confederacy Constitution, also known as the Great Law of Peace, is an oral history passed down for over 500 years. It established a democracy between 5 Iroquois-speaking tribes. In it, there's the belief that human actions should account for families 7 generations and beyond.
Some things you just hear throughout your life, you got to take care of the 7 generations, next 7 generations, take care of the future. The children are our future.
That's Cindy Yahola, a member of the Creek Nation. She also organizes the Wilson County Powwow in Tennessee.
We've got to invest in our future. We've got to invest in our environment for the future. We've got to invest in the wildlife for our future. You've got to invest in everything and respect everything for us to all have a future.
The third principle is reciprocity, and it underlines the entire posture of the indigenous people to their surroundings. It's a spiritual principle of understanding that we benefit from the creatures living around us as much as we benefit from their death and consuming them. There's a reverence to this. Stories are passed down through generations about the idea of reciprocity, like this one Stephanie Colty shared with me, that's told in her Tulalip tribe.
A long time ago, there was this village. They'd eat the salmon, and then somebody would tell the kids to go put the bones back into the water. And then there was this rotten boy that wouldn't do it. Instead of throwing them, he goes and throws the bones in a bush. And then a couple days later, they're fishing and they brought fish back and they weren't fully formed, like they had diseases on them, or like half of them were missing, like a trunk got bitten out of one. And the little boy heard what they were talking about, but he didn't care. And he was just going along the river, and then he fell in the water. He was taken by the salmon people. They took him all the way down to the salmon village. And then he got to observe how they lived down below. So one day he was playing with a girl, and then the girl was missing a leg. And so he's like, "Why aren't you whole? Why are you missing a leg?" And then she was like, "Some of the bones didn't come back." The chief told him, "Your people and I have an agreement. We sacrifice our bodies to feed you, and our only request was for you to bring the bone back so that way we can be whole again."
The indigenous people's spiritual relationship to the land and the inhabitants on it draws them to find practical ways of living that honors the life lost to subsistence hunting.
You know how much to take, you know how much. And every time you take, you give, you pray. You pray or you sing or you give something back to it. And that's just a habit that we all have now.
This reminded me of something that Brent Rogers does. He says a prayer of thanks over every bird he kills. Or like the prayer at the opening luncheon at the National Wild Turkey Federation conference.
Give us wisdom and reverence so to use the resources of nature, that no one may suffer from our abuse of them, and that generations yet to come may continue to praise you for your bounty.
There's an understanding that life is precious, that taking a thing that isn't yours demands your reverence because it has sacrificed itself for your betterment.
After this break, the final piece in the wild turkey conservation story, the very important piece that ties the ancient to the modern, brings us to where we are now. We'll be right back. Hey, so it is September 4th, and I am opening the 1440 Daily News Digest for today, this very day. I'm going to go down to the etc. section. This is like one of my favorite sections. And I would really like to know where the best fall foliage is going to be. So let me click on that. And there's this cool map with a timeline that I can choose. Oh my goodness, this is great. So September 8th, it's looking like it'll start to happen in the top. And then where will it happen in Nashville, I wonder? Oh, by the end of October, it's coming, fall foliage. The 1440 Daily News Digest helped me figure out when to find my fall foliage, along with things like Disney's Cinderella Castle is getting a makeover and castle transformation over the years. But at the top, there's things like top headlines we need to know, sports entertainment, science and technology, business and markets. It's all there. It's extremely important stuff. This free daily news digest, they sponsor this show. And that is a really big deal to me because I love the work that they do. So go sign up. I know there's a lot of things we're signed up for, but I'm telling you, this is the one you will not unsubscribe from. So let's get back to the episode.
I have read many definitions of what is a conservationist, but I suspect that the best one is written not with a pen, but with an axe. It is a matter of what a man thinks about while chopping, or while deciding what to chop. A conservationist is one who is humbly aware that with each stroke, he is writing his signature on the face of his land.
That's the wild turkey conservation niche's very own historian, Brent Rogers. You've heard his voice already. He writes books about the subculture, including his recent about how the restoration of the turkey brought about an entire industry of call makers and innovation. The quotation you heard him reading is from the book A Sand County Almanac, Aldo Leopold's seminal work on conservation that contains his land ethic. It's been mentioned a couple times in this series, and Brent reads it annually. He feels a connection to the author as a fellow Iowan. Aldo is the father of modern conservation. He was an inheritor of the philosophies of John Muir, the founder of the national park system. Aldo developed what he called a land ethic. It's the idea that to consider what's best for Homo sapiens is to consider what's best for soils, waters, plants, and animals. It was an enlarging of our community to include all of the land. Aldo pioneered managing game species using scientific evidence and ethics. He writes, "A land ethic changes the role of Homo sapiens from conqueror of the land to a plain member and citizen of it." Aldo was one of the early developers of the wildlife management discipline. He redefined what wilderness meant. At a time when wilderness meant a place to hunt and cultivate for human good, he saw it as a place to respect and keep not just for human good, but for the good of all species, which meant there would be times when hunting was not the way to solve a problem. It was indeed a tool to be used wisely. He taught his students to look for, quote, the beauty as well as the utility of the whole, and know the two cannot be separated, end quote. This ethic and position was a new idea at the time, but in the context of American history, it wasn't new, of course. It wasn't original. It was a borrowing, and it should sound familiar to you. Leopold's land ethic is permeated in the principles of the native peoples, and this is no coincidence or accident.
When he started his career in 1909 as a forest ranger, he had been educated at Yale, which was, I think at that time, one of the, or perhaps the only school of forest management.
This is Dr. Joshua Bellin from LaRoche University in Pennsylvania. He teaches a course called Aldo Leopold, Native Americans, and the Land Ethic.
So he goes out west after getting his degree at Yale, and he himself had a very, I would say, utilitarian perspective toward the land and toward forest management. And if you look at some of his early writings, that's really what he's saying. But around the mid-20s and 30s, he starts to move in the direction of thinking about the ethics of land management. Are we respecting the land and the creatures that inhabit it? Some of that has to do with the rise of the ecology, which was the study of the whole system of organisms and the networks. But he was around native people the entire time he was in the Southwest. That was 15 years.
Though Aldo's writing and work ended up sparking a modern environmental ethic, he initially espoused racist attitudes toward indigenous peoples. But over time, it becomes clear through his essays and writing, and ultimately in the development of his land ethic, that he learned from and grew out of these initial assumptions.
But I think what Leopold started to realize was the reason the land was healthier in some of those regions than in regions of the U.S. was that it had been managed better by the indigenous people who had inhabited that land for thousands and thousands of years. He has one quote where he basically says that the people who have preceded us in the Southwest have managed to live on the land without damaging it, without destroying it. And he says we're moving in a direction where we're destroying it.
Aldo adopted the principles that governed these Purple Mountain majesties long before the Europeans invaded the eastern and southern borders. His important work is a reorientation to the indigenous posture of reciprocity and natural cooperation.
This really comes out for Leopold in one of his more famous essays, Thinking Like a Mountain, where he talks about hunting wolves. And where he talks about a very early experience that he had. He and his friends were out hunting, and they downed a mother wolf that was crossing a river with her pups. Then he describes this very powerful experience of looking into the eyes of the wolf, and as the wolf died, recognizing that there was something in those eyes that he had never taken into account before, whether you call it wisdom or some sort of idea about the land and how to inhabit the land. His training and the orthodoxy of his time was eliminate wolves, eliminate mountain lions. In that essay, Thinking Like a Mountain, he represents this idea that eliminating wolves in order to presumably produce more deer for hunters may be a grievous error. When you eliminate wolves, you have lots of cascading effects down the ecological pyramid, as it's sometimes referred to. And that's where he started, I think, to really articulate this idea that interdependence is an important way of thinking about the land. Any creature, whether it be wolves or in the case of what we're talking about here, wild turkeys, has an ecological role to play.
Aldo Leopold died in 1948. He had a heart attack while fighting a wildfire on his neighbor's property. The same year, indigenous peoples got the right to vote in the areas he served 20 years prior. The next year, 1949, a Sand County Almanac was published. Now, let's get back to our beloved turkey, shall we? It may seem like we're all alone in the woods without having heard a single gobble in quite some time, but the chess match is only heating up. The same year, Aldo Leopold died, 1948, a man named Tom Kelly graduated with a degree in forestry, a field Leopold both studied himself and reinvented in his lifetime. Tom Kelly should sound familiar. We talked about him briefly in episode 2. Heard his voice. It's highly likely that Tom would have known of Aldo Leopold. It's not a stretch to say that he may have studied work Aldo had been part of pioneering for decades. Brent Rogers' research on the early days of the formalized turkey conservation movement finds that early murmurings began around the time Tom Kelly entered into his professional forestry career.
So politicians and landowners and conservation organizations, academics and biologists all came together and in 1959 had their first wild turkey symposium and said, we understand there's a problem and these are the tools we need to fix it. And they got busy and started to do that. So then decades later, it could be handed off.
This generation of hunters and environmental workers, those like Tom Kelly, that inherited Leopold's land ethic, worked to bring the whole of nature's best interest to the center of the conversation rather than merely humankind's interest alone. Tom Kelly would go on to write the most important book in the culture of the wild turkey called 10th Legion. It's about the tradition and importance of turkey hunting, but borrows the style and tone of Aldo Leopold's writing and infuses it with wit and humor.
It is, of course, a cult, and like all cultists, we tend to be fanatics. A cult whose members are mostly wet, often cold, and usually unsuccessful. We will be delighted to have you.
The writing, and the book that came from it, brought an entire generation together to solve a problem. And it all seemingly came from the willingness to adopt and appreciate a new perspective. In 1973, Kelly published 10th Legion. You know what else happened in 1973? The official founding of the National Wild Turkey Federation. In the course of researching this project, I became increasingly interested, maybe even a little obsessed, in a particular aspect of the story. It's the phenomenon of two politically opposed people groups coming to agreement, solving a problem, mending a gap. But it's a real conundrum, right, this whole thing? Because our population continues to increase. We do have practical needs. Aldo recognized this.
Leopold would never have maintained that that means that you have to take a completely hands-off approach to everything and never touch anything and never change anything. He recognized that that was unrealistic and that human beings need to draw on the resources of the land as well, but at least to take a more measured approach.
So how do we accomplish a measured approach? Some have turned to veganism or have become vegetarians. Some have devoted their lives to farmsteading and knowing intimately where their food comes from. No matter what, I've learned through this project that it's all messy.
We have not improved on creation, right? Creation had it right. Everything we've done since then has been an effort to augment that, and much of it we haven't got right. And what we, I think, need to do is make sure that we're not trying to manage things in isolation of people, but along with people. And that's what will make it sustainable, is being able to understand how is what we're doing having an impact, and what is it that we can and can't do. And that's conservation, which I think is just acknowledging that fact that we have to coexist. We can't exist, separately.
Even this philosophy is an inheritance of the dichotomy of the native practices of living off the land while revering it. It's complicated, to be sure, it's nuanced, but it's important, though a seemingly unsolvable riddle. And the wild turkey conservation story gives us some keys to this puzzle. After this break, we look closer at these clues to find how it's relevant to us here and now. Be right back. In my conversation with Josh, I wondered what it was about Aldo Leopold that took him from being a student of his time, where he was taught to control the land, to harness it, and then ended up a prophetic voice promoting indigenous practices and principles.
He was always learning, and he was always willing to learn from whatever circumstances he found himself in, whether that was the trips to Mexico, whether that was living among indigenous people, whether that was when he was up in Madison. And he learned so much from that experience, the experience of actually having really, really unhealthy land of his own that he and his family had to groom back to health. Throughout that life, he just kept changing. He never was satisfied to say, well, I'm good. I've learned as much as I need to. This is working for me. I'll just stick with it for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years. He was always open to influences from others, being open to other people and listening to other people. That's something that I think he never failed to do throughout the course of his life.
It's this kind of posture that enabled the wild turkey conservation movement to succeed, and it provides immense importance for us now.
And to discover this importance, we need to go back to one of the biggest blockbusters of all time, about a shark.
You're going to need a bigger boat.
Okay, now you might be asking what Jaws has to do with wild turkeys. So just hang with me. This series was originally reported, written, and produced in the summer of 2024. Now on July 5th, in the dusk of that morning, with the residue from neighborhood fireworks lifting from the dew-soaked Tennessee countryside, I was drawn to an article by Olivia Rutigliano. It was about the movie Jaws and its philosophical significance.
The circumstances surrounding the hunt for the killer shark mirror many of our own current circumstances. Politicians saving face, consumerism, uncontrollable nature that rages and destroys. Olivia points out the obvious comparison of Jaws to Herman Melville's novel about Moby Dick.
Listeners of Niche to Meet You will note that we went in depth on the Moby Dick story for our Barkley Marathons episode. And he's a character that I've mentioned in this story about wild turkeys already, because there's a resemblance in hunters looking for the wild turkey, like Ahab chases his whale, in that you can't know where the creature is, but it knows where you are, and ultimately it's in control. So when I read this article, I initially delighted in the shark as a comparison to my newfound turkey companion. But then I noticed something else. The article notes that the quest for this shark brings three very different people together. A cop who knows politics, a biologist who knows science,
and a grizzled sailor who has a lifetime of experience with the beast. These three probably never would have found their way to be on a boat together, except for this singular goal: a shark. But not just a shark. A shark surrounded by high stakes. And the three hunters are there for wildly different reasons. Though the agendas differ, I wonder if they may not actually be in opposition, though they are culturally dichotomous. Over time on the boat, through storytelling and living in a small space together, the boundaries of their antagonistic philosophies meet and soften. They, on opposite ends of their own spectrums, lay down their agendas and compare experience without expectation. And they did all that in the process of chasing a creature. Do you see what I see? These characters feel a lot like some of the folks we've met in this miniseries about wild turkeys. Varied. Perhaps we might assume they're opposed. But they've all recognized that there have been missteps and know that something has to change. They see a problem, though maybe from different angles.
If you can see the past and you can see the future and bring both of them to the present, that's what we need to do. And we need to see what has worked and what hasn't in terms of hunting and conservation if we're going to do it right in the future.
The 70th anniversary edition of A Sandy County Almanac features an introduction by Pulitzer Prize-winning author Barbara Kingsolver. Her best-selling books are endorsed by the likes of Oprah. Kingsolver grew up in rural Kentucky, still lives in Appalachia. She's deeply enmeshed in both rural and mass culture. She's very familiar with Leopold's work. She calls him a part of her inner circle, even though he died before she was born. The introduction she wrote brings a modern yet informed perspective to the book. And while Leopold himself makes no mention of oppositional politics in the debate on our environment, Kingsolver does.
Environmental news is mostly terrible, and the word environmentalism has become a civic hand grenade. You'd think that two camps calling themselves conservationists and conservatives might find some overlap, but no such luck. We hurl insults, scuffle for control of the helm, and mostly do nothing while Rome burns. Or rather, as I write this, Californian forests and much of Australia.
She goes on to draw the analogy that one side of the environmentalism debate sees the world as a garden we can reap to our advantage, while the other sees it as a living home in dire need of long-term protection.
We live in an era when it seems that no one with differing opinions can see each other in any other light than dimmed, at best. We have trouble relating to one another, seeing each other's sides. And the wild turkey tale is just one example of ways that we've been able to build trust amongst ourselves, commune across difference.
I think by them being together in a room, they begin to gain an appreciation and understanding that the hunter is not just about the harvest, that it's about the habitat and the wildlife. And the environmentalist, they start realizing that those hunters have a really unique perspective. So there's a lot of commonality that they can bring together. And by working together, we have a lot better results in protecting, preserving, and restoring wild areas.
The founding of the National Wild Turkey Federation in 1973 was an example of this theory in practice, when seemingly opposing forces worked across divides to listen, share, and collaborate.
They helped get all the states talking together. And actually what we did as early as anybody can remember is we created what's called the Turkey Technical Committee. And this got together all the turkey biologists from across the country and allowed them to share the information of things that they had learned, things that they were trying to figure out problems about, and allowed now there to be a better dissemination of information across borders, where before everybody's kind of working in a vacuum.
And what they discovered is that when you do what's best for the wild turkeys, you improve the habitat for everything else, too.
The benefits of what we do impact things far greater than just the wild turkey. So the work that we're doing is we're trying to make sure that there's proximity to good, clean, abundant water. So that's helping communities. We're trying to make sure that habitats are resilient to catastrophic wildfire in parts of the country. Again, the more work that you're doing for healthy habitats, the more other species benefit. And so when we're doing habitat work for turkeys, the tortoises are benefiting, the red cockaded woodpeckers they're benefiting, pollinators are benefiting, because what's good for turkeys, you need good bugging habitat, flowers, native grasses, things like that. So it's good for pollinators.
In the wild turkey conservation niche, you'll find social conservatives and liberal environmentalists. Those who hunt the bird must appreciate, respect, and participate in the efforts of those who wish to save the environment. And those who value the preservation of habitat for all nature must appreciate, respect, and participate in the earnestness of those who hunt them. Now, stereotypes are only so helpful, right? These social groups are not monoliths, and they are not clearly divided along lines. Regardless, the dynamics at play are in a symbiotic relationship that requires all participants to join the dance.
We listen and take our truths, all of us, from people we trust, who know us, and who have our best interests at heart. This is a built-in bias of the human psyche and the crux of the fix we're in as we stand in nations divided against themselves. As long as we live in entirely separate worlds without comprehension of the other's language or daily grinds, the door between us is sealed. Not a word will pass from one side to the other.
This is reminiscent of the relationship of the indigenous people to the land, the principle of reciprocity that folks like Stephanie Colty, Mary Wiyaki, and Cindy Yohola shared. The philosophy in practice takes an appreciation of everything within a social ecosystem and an understanding that diversity is necessary for survival.
We need to appreciate diversity, being thankful for the different perspectives that everybody brings, and that is valuable to the table when we're sitting down and talking about how to move forward and preserve our environment. And those perspectives are very valuable, and we just need to find the common ground and work toward things. And sometimes you give and take, and so sometimes you don't 100% agree with something, but there is a benefit that is gained. And some of that benefit is inclusion of more people that you bring into the outdoors. So it's a balancing act.
The wild turkey conservation niche serves as an example of how all parties realized that in order to get the thing they wanted, they had to embrace the diversity and care, really care, about what seemed to be the opposite of what they wanted. They had to really care about the work of the other party because the job could not be done without them. And the truth is, what they wanted was at the heart of what the other party wanted too. Remember that viral Instagram reel of mine, the one with Billy? One of the top comments is from a self-called leftist eco-nut. She said that hunters are some of the biggest wildlife and nature fans and allies in conservation that she's ever met. She said that the, quote, "yeehaw good old boys," end quote, are the ones running litter pickup, park, and trail maintenance, and are supporters of folks like her. Brent Rogers was adamant about this too.
What is great is we all really in the end want the same things. We want to keep the things that we consider valuable. Being able to hunt, not everybody's for that. But when the people that want to hunt are the driving force behind making sure that habitat for wildlife is improved, it certainly gives you not just a vote, but a stake in it. And that's where I think we've been able to work together even outside of political norms, because people just can't deny that there's not only is there a passion there, but there's blood, sweat, and tears invested into it. And as you talk to the biologists and folks like that, that's what they do. They pursued those careers because it's what they wanted to do. And I very much admire them. As a hunter, I think we all just give according to our ability. We share food, we share water, we share land. Conservation is very much about that. It's just acknowledging that we're all living on the same green orb together.
Aldo Leopold wrote, No important change in ethics was ever accomplished without an internal change in our intellectual emphasis, loyalties, affections, and convictions. It's very easy to assume that it's not possible to work together, that the gap is too large to mend. There have been too many examples of it not working. When we mostly see that sometimes, even with shared history and love, the best way to respect another person and their wildly different ideals is to create space, widen the gap between us. But maybe what the wild turkey shows us is that sometimes there are places bridges can be built. Now, this is not a rule that covers all issues for all people. There are certainly moments and situations in which there may not be common ground at all, or relatability, or frankly should offer compromise. I get that. And I don't know what to do with that conundrum. I'm sorry to say, a podcast won't offer you answers. I wish it could, and I really wish I could be the one to do it. To assume I could would be naive, and it would be impossible. But what is possible is to tell stories that contain nuance, like the nuances we found in the wild turkey conservation story, in the Native American posture toward land, which inspired a man from Wisconsin to instill practices that led to the rescue of a beloved bird. Maybe just hearing about gaps being mended in one small corner of the world through this niche will give us a little bit of relief. Maybe it will give us hope to hear how other people's curiosity and joy are mending that which divides. And no, this is not easy, nor is it simple. But for those who love and appreciate the wild turkey, it's happening every day. It's like Barbara Kingsolver says,
to adapt ourselves to an existence that honors both our needs and our fellow species for all of time is to honor that which is godly in ourselves.
Now, you may wonder what the turkeys think of all of this. It's kind of odd that the main character in this story has been completely silent, except for maybe a couple gobbles. We did reach out to them for comment, but as of the writing of this episode, 6 months after I began my journey into the story of the wild turkey, I still have yet to see a single one. Not on the side of the road, not in a neighborhood, not in a field, not a single one. Like I said, turkeys are like Bill Murray. They're playing a chess match with me, and they're winning. I fully expect that soon after this series releases, I'll look out my front door on a cloudy day and see one in full strut, spitting and drumming, stomping as the ground shakes beneath it. Maybe it'll even start to rain. Checkmate. The Niche to Meet You project and the stories we tell are lovingly crafted for you by me and my storytelling sidekick and editor, Chris Thiessen. The music you heard was composed by Abigail Flowers and arranged by Zach and Maggie White. Additional music was provided by Blue Dot Sessions. Our art is by Rachel Hardiker, and our mastering is by Kevin Morris. Finally, we want to thank Laura Bates and Tom Kelly for allowing us to use 10th Legion audiobook files. You can read more about the Niche to Meet You project and all of the wonderful niche interests we cover at www.niche2meetyou.show. Thank you for listening. It has been so very niche to meet you. I hope you enjoyed this episode, my new niche buddy. There are more episodes waiting for you wherever you're listening to this one right here, right now. So go find them, like our episode about dog agility, or like vintage car radio restoration. There is so much more to be found in the Nicheverse. I'm so glad to have had you with us. Don't be a stranger. We'll see you next time.